Hello, thank you guys for tuning back in. I realize it's been a while since I've posted. My life's been pretty crazy, so I've been trying to figure some things out, but welcome back. I had to reread a little bit of chapter 17 to kind of refresh my memory on what happened, but basically Jen is telling Luke about the rally that she's planned with the other shadow children that she's been talking to on the internet. So this is chapter 18. Luke said, he couldn't look at Jen's triumphant grin. He thought about how terrifying it was just running back and forth between his and Jen's house. Even this morning, on his third run through their yards, his heart had pounded so hard he'd wondered if it could just burst from fear. In the yard, at least, he was sure, or as sure as he could be, that no one was watching. How could Jen think he would dare go out in public where he knew people could see him? People in government, no less, and say, I'm a third child. I want to be treated like everyone else. Scared? Jen said softly. Luke could only nod. She turned back to the computer. Well, I am too, she said matter-of-factly. She typed something and then looked back at Luke. Some, but you don't think it'll be a relief? No more hiding? No more pretending? Just being free? Luke wondered if he'd always misunderstood the meaning of the word relief. Jen's rally sounded like his worst nightmare. You think about it, she said. You don't have to decide anything today. Now, ready to chat? Luke looked back at the computer screen where rows of words were unfurling. Carlos, it's 1:05 here, and my parents think it's a waste to run the AC during the day. Can you say heartless? Sean, why don't you just crank it up, then turn it off again right before they get home? And that's what Pat and I do. They'll never know. Carlos, yeah, but my parents probably read their electric bill. Yolanda, so what are they going to do? Ground you? Carlos, good point. I'm searching for the temp control right now. Yolanda, where's Jen? Sean, you know she never gets up this early. Carlos, my parents have the temp control locked somehow. Told you they were evil. Where is Jen? I can't wait for her sarcastic comment. Luke read the words Jen was typing. I'm right here, and Sean, I do get up early. I just don't always choose to see you first thing. And Carlos, what's wrong? Is there sweat in your eyes? There's only one R in sarcastic. She hit another key, and the words appeared right up with everyone else's. They were followed quickly by another line. Sean, good morning to you too, Jen. Glad to see you're still among the living. Jen typed quickly. No, just among the hidden. Not the same thing at all. Then she sent that too. What is this? Luke asked. Some sort of game? He remembered her mentioning a Carlos before and never explaining who he was. Were these some sort of computerized imaginary friends? Carlos, Sean, Yolanda, they're all other third children. Sean's even got a brother, Pat, who's a fourth child. This is how I talk to them. Luke watched the next line of type appear. Carlos said, thanks for the sympathy, Jen. But how? Luke asked, still doubtful. Oh, you know, it's the net, Jen said. If you've got a spare hour or two sometime, I'll give you the technical gobbledygook to explain it. I have no clue what that word is. All I care about is that it works. I'd die without someone to talk to. She was typing even as she talked. Luke craned his head to see what she wrote. Guess what? The kid I told you about, Luke, he's here with me. Quickly, 3 Hi Lukes appeared on the screen. Luke fought down panic. "But the government," he said. "They'll find me." Jin playfully slugged his arm. "Chill, okay? Nobody from the government can get on this chat room. We all use a password. Just third children know it. And anyhow, even if someone else read this, what would they know? Just somewhere in the world there's a kid named Luke. Big deal. But they can trace you through the computer, and then they'll find me too." Luke's heart was pounding. "Look, if they could trace people through the computer or look through this chat room, they would have found me a long time ago," Jin said. Luke tried to think clearly. "Your parents," he said. "You said they bribe people, so you're safe. But mine—" Jin was shaking her head. "No, I'm not safe," she said grimly. "Even my parents couldn't bribe the population police if they found me. Maybe to keep them from looking, but maybe not even that. The population police get some ridiculously big reward for finding illegal kids. Why do you think I hide at all? Why do you think we have to have the rally? Everybody should be safe, and nobody should have to use bribes just to walk down the street or go to a mall or take a ride in a car." Luke glanced back at the computer screen, where the conversation continued. "How did you find all these people? How did they find out the password?" "Well, I created the chat room, so I made it up," Jin said. "And I knew a couple other shadow kids, and I got my parents and their parents to get the password to them. And then some of these kids spread the password to other kids they knew. Last I counted, I had contact with 800 kids." Luke shook his head. He didn't think even his parents knew that many people. "So, what's the password?" he asked. "Free," Jin said. "It's free." Alright, I'll go ahead and read chapter 19. Luke left Jin's that day with a pile of books and computer printouts clutched to his chest. "Some reading material for you," she said, "so you'll understand." Back in his own room, Luke sat down on his bed and opened the first book. It was thick and carried its title in ominous black letters. "The Population Disaster." The type inside was small and closely spaced. Luke read a sentence at random. "While debate continues over the carrying capacity of the Earth," he skipped ahead. "If the total fertility rate in industrialized countries had remained at or below 2.1, Luke saw that reading this book would be like puzzling out the letters Dad got from the government. He glanced at the other two books, The Famine Years Revisited and The Population Reversal. They looked no easier. The computer printouts were at least brief, but both The Population of the Shadows and The Population Law, Our Country's Biggest Mistake, were full of big words. Luke sighed. He was tempted to put the books aside and just have Jin explain them to him. And he might have, except for what she'd said as she'd begun handing them to him. "Oh my gosh, I didn't think... You can read, can't you?" "Of course," Luke had answered stiffly. "I was reading in the chat room, wasn't I?" "Yes, but you could have been... Oh, never mind. I've offended you again, haven't I? Me and my big mouth. It wouldn't have been anything to be ashamed of, even if you couldn't. Oh, I'm making things worse. I'll shut up. Here." And it had seemed to Luke like she'd pulled even bigger books off the bookshelf after that. Now he resolutely turned to the beginning of The Population Disaster and began reading. Since some elements of the overpopulation crisis were foreseen in the 1800s, an uninformed observer could only wonder why humankind came so near to total annihilation. But Luke reached for the dictionary and settled in for the long haul. It rained for the next several days, so Luke read constantly, not even tempted to race over to Jin's instead. He could hear Dad banging around downstairs, stomping in and out from the barn or the machine shed. Now that the harvest was in, Luke thought Dad might be bored without the pigs to take care of. So Luke read cautiously, always ready to shove his population book under his pillow and replace it with one of his adventure books. The preparation paid off on the fourth day when he heard Dad's footsteps on the stairs. "Hey, Luke, what are you up to?" "Nothing," Luke said, turning Treasure Island right side up at the very last moment. Dad didn't notice. "Want to play cards?" They played rummy on Luke's bed. Luke could feel the corner of the population disaster poking his back throughout the entire game, and he kept wanting to ask Dad about what he was learning. He spent most of his first game biting his tongue. Dad won. "Again?" Dad asked, shuffling the cards. If you don't have any work you've got to do in November with no livestock, only work I've got now is figuring out how we're going to pay our bills once the hog money runs out. Isn't there some way to grow stuff inside during the winter, like down in the basement with special lights, lots of water, and extra minerals? And then you could sell it, Luke asked without thinking. He'd just finished reading a chapter in the population book about hydroponics. Dad squinted. "Seems I did hear tell of that once." Luke won the next hand. Dad didn't seem to be concentrating. At the end, Dad said, "Mind if we quit now?" Luke was terrified Dad would ask where he had heard of hydroponics, so he just said, "No problem." Dad left muttering, "Growing food inside. Luke wished he'd had the nerve to ask about the population law or the families or even some family history. Once he got past the dense language, the books Jen had loaned him were full of revelations. As best he could to understand it, the world had simply gotten too full of people about 20 years ago. Poor countries had it particularly bad, and people were often starved or were malnourished. And then something worse happened. Terrible droughts struck the parts of the world that always grew the most food. For 3 years, they grew almost nothing. People everywhere starved. In Luke's country, the government began rationing food, only allowing people to have 1,500 calories a day. And to make sure there was food, they seized control of all food production. They forced factories that had made junk food to crank out healthy food instead. They forced farmers to move to land that would be more likely to produce. Is that why we don't live near our grandparents? Luke wanted to ask his parents. But the government didn't think that was enough. They wanted to make sure there would never again be more people than the farmers could feed. So they passed the population law too. In the evening, spooning in his stew or cutting up his meat, Luke felt pangs of guilt now. Perhaps someone was starving someplace because of him. But the food wasn't there. Wherever the starving people were, it was here, on his plate. He ate it all. "Luke, you're so quiet lately. Is everything all right?" Mother asked one night when he waved away second helpings of cabbage. "I'm fine," he said, and went back to eating silently. But he was worrying that maybe the government was right and he shouldn't exist. Only when he got to the 2 computer printouts did he begin to feel better. One of the articles began, "The population law is evil," and the other said, "Hundreds of children are hidden, mistreated, starved, neglected, abused, even murdered, for no reason. Forcing children into the shadows can be counted as genocide." "How can this be?" he asked Jen a week later when he finally got a chance to go back to her house. "How can the books and the articles be so different?" She handed him a glass of soda. "What do you mean?" she asked. Luke pointed to the population disaster. "This book says the human race would have gone extinct if we hadn't had the population law. And this," he held up and shook the Problem of the Shadows article. This says the population law was totally unnecessary and cruel. It says there was plenty of food, and even during the famines, except that the barons were hoarding it. Belatedly, he remembered that Jen was a baron. Sorry. She shrugged, not the least bit offended. So, what's the truth? He asked. Jen shook potato chips into a bowl. Well, think about it. The government allowed these books to be published. They probably even paid for them. So, of course, they're going to say what the government wants people to believe. They're just propaganda, lies. But the articles, the authors of those probably put themselves at risk getting the information out. So they're right. Luke pondered that. Then why'd you make me read these books? He asked. So you'd understand how stupid the government is, she said. So you'd understand why we had to make them see the truth. Luke looked at the stack of thick books on the Talbots' kitchen counter. They looked so official, so important. Who was he to say they weren't true?